All right, so this is a quick look at just a short test piece, testing out the sounds in Muse Score 4, the Muse Sounds, specifically the Muse Sounds. I think I've got one of the MS Classic sounds in there on the cowbell, but the rest of these are all Muse Sounds. I was going for kind of a little sketch. This is called Weekend Update, but the sketch is sort of based on a type of tune that you would hear in late night television. So, The Tonight Show or Saturday Night Live or something like that. Just a short, less than a minute, 1 minute kind of introductory tune, very simple ABA form. And that kind of a tight house band sort of instrument complement. So I've got here what the orchestration is supposed to be is one trumpet, one alto sax, a tenor sax, trombone, baritone sax for the winds. Then you have a guitar, distortion guitar, piano, a Hammond organ, rock organ, and a bass, electric bass. And then for the percussion part of the rhythm section, you have a small section for congas, drum kit, obviously, cowbell, and tambourine. So this is a very straightforward, tight, small kind of jazz house band sort of instrumentation. What I want to discuss here is a little bit of the compositional stuff, although that's not all that important. Mostly I want to discuss the treatment of the sounds in the notation, as I've been discussing on this channel for quite some time, in order to get the desired effects. First of all, if we go back to score view and open up the mix, you can see how I have things mixed. I have the trumpet up pretty high. There's a second trumpet on there. What this is this actually has a mute. This has a straight mute samples from Muse Sounds. And what I like to do is on specific hits, stabs, places where it's very aggressive in the articulation, which is most of the time in this example, I'll double up that mute just to give it kind of that tinny ring to it, just on the attack, on the articulation. And you can see that the notes are shorter on these articulations, and it doesn't play every single note, particularly the sustains are not present there. But I find that this helps in the mix rather than relying on a completely different sample that gives you that sort of quality. Sometimes you can augment sounds by adding in a layer of another sound to help it in specific areas, particularly maybe in the articulation, the attack, or even in the extended tone of it. Some samples that can help, mutes for brass, but also you can look at the synth sounds, the MS Classic synthesizer sounds, particularly like the warm synthesizer sounds, or maybe a sawtooth tone. You can use those kinds of sounds to augment. You can also use other sounds to augment. Sometimes you can use even some of the woodwind sounds, bari sax for the low brass, or throw a bari sax in on top of mix it way down, but throw it on top of other woodwinds, bassoon or whatever, if you want something really, really aggressive for particular articulation. So anyway, thinking outside the box, using other sounds to augment the sounds that you're after. Use what sounds right. Don't necessarily be restricted to using what the name of the instrument is. So that's the trumpet up here. The alto sax is just the alto sax sounds. Some articulations on there I'll discuss in a minute. Tenor saxophone is normal. Trombone, normal. Baritone saxophone. You'll notice a difference in the dynamics, however. I've got fortissimo dynamics and everything except for the alto saxophone. I found that the alto saxophone forte dynamic was sufficient, especially with it mixed way up. It gave me a lot to work with in terms of dynamics. You see I do change dynamics here on the alto saxophone part. It goes down to mezzo piano, kind of quick whiplash changes. And I have found that you run into undesirable artifacts with the Muse Score 4 and Muse Sounds play engine and samples combination. Whenever you're doing extreme dynamic shifts, when it has to crossfade between a wide range of samples, you can kind of get some clicking and popping sometimes. So in an effort to avoid some of that on the main instrument here, the main solo instrument, I have it limited to forte at the max, and we're going down to mezzo forte, then to piano, or down to mezzo piano. Not very, very far in terms of stretches. Now, the other instruments I do here would be a forte piano. Now, notice I did not use the forte piano on the instruments. What I did is I wrote an attack at forte with the decrescendo down to piano, kind of a whiplash change, and there might be some clicking and popping in there, but you don't hear it in the context of the full group with everything going on, particularly with all the percussion playing. But I found that with forte piano effects, it's better to attack and then re-attack at the low dynamic and then crescendo. That seems to work better. And I didn't do it here, but usually when I do this, I will make that first attack note different lengths across instruments so that it's kind of staggered and you don't hear the re-articulation quite as clearly. Another thing I like to do is to add the accent. Add an accent on that forte piano figure. It just helps with it. Or a sforzando figure. That's a little hack that helps. Falls. You can see I have some glissandi and some falls and places where, like right here, there's a glissandi going up to a glissando going up to a high note and a decrescendo, whiplash decrescendo. This is a doit. Now, I found that the doit articulation for where I wanted it here didn't sound right. And this is a major point to make about Muse Score 4 and the play engine. Sometimes you will see that an articulation doesn't sound the way you want it to. It might be acceptable to somebody or to the Muse Sounds people as they created the sample set, and sometimes there are errors that need to be corrected where the samples didn't come out right or they don't play back right. Nonetheless, what you should do is test out the articulation you want, and if it doesn't do what you want, or if you want diversity, if you're doing that same articulation over and over again, write it in a more automated way. So this is some automation. I'm automating what's going on here as if I was in a digital audio workstation and I didn't have a sample for the articulation that I wanted that I could key switch to or layer in. What I would do is I would automate it using MIDI control data to create the sound that I want. I'm essentially doing the exact same thing here. And if you can do it in a digital audio workstation, you shouldn't be reduced to not doing it here and just using the articulations that are available. Automate it. Use the dynamics and articulations that are available to create a composite of what it is that you're going for. And that allows you the ability to get the sound, first of all, that you want, but second, also to give you diverse interpretations of the same idea if it's repeating over and over and over again. So that's a quick point on that. Let's listen to some of these just to get a flavor for what they sound like. So here the trumpet sounds together as one trumpet. So you can see there's a now it's kind of a lip trill up here, and I do have the sustain down here in the mute, and these are kind of opposing each other. But it's buried first of all, so I can kind of get away with this a little bit and kind of get that buzzy ring. This goes all the way up to fortissimo. But you notice I pulled down to piano and only go up to forte because that seemed to fit the sample, this trill sample best. And it sounds kind of like a cross between a lip trill and kind of a little bit of a screechy crack on that high note, which would be a high, what would it be, an E in the case of a transposition here. So it's not extremely high, but it's up there. I've got another one over here you can listen to. Here's another section with the trumpet and kind of an automated performance here using the dynamics articulations. So So you can see right here how that forte piano mechanism works pretty well to re-articulate at the low dynamic. It sounds really, really clean, much more real than the actual forte piano samples that are in there. Let's listen to some of the alto saxophone. Now, just a quick reference about the style of music here. When Howard Shore wrote the music for Saturday Night Live in the very first season, he described it as he wanted the sound to be, for that late night television band, he wanted it to sound like a group of soloists. Now, there is clearly a soloist here that plays something uniquely different, and the rest of the wind section is playing very much the same kind of rhythmic material. However, you'll notice that the bari sax has a few rhythmic differences and a few extra notes. That bottom sort of quality that you see in there, it goes all the way down to the basement too, all the way to the lowest note that the bari sax can play. And this isn't even a note that's available to all saxophones, but you can do it on a bari saxophone way in the basement to really accentuate the absolute lowest sound that the instrument can make. Here for the alto saxophone, you can hear these articulations working together. And then for the trumpet, as you saw, there's a few variations. So there are some soloistic elements that happen, some for the tenor sax later on. But really, the alto saxophone is the solo instrument. So let's listen to some of that. So you can see how this works. And here's another spot actually right over here. Let me show you this little trill. So I wanted a turn on there, and when I went to use the turn or write in the turn, it didn't sound right, but I found that if I put the trill on it, it actually gave me just one turn, and it sounded perfect. It sounded exactly right. One issue you'll notice is you hear a little bit of clicking and popping in this performance. There's a lot of concern about that. Now, I think the concern really needs to be with the very exposed parts whenever something is really isolated and by itself. But when you have ensemble music like this, you can really deal with these whiplash articulations in some of the crackling and popping that can be artifacts in that performance with the play engine. You don't hear that material in the performance. When you have everything together. In fact, I'll show you here in a moment when I put all the winds together. You don't hear any of that, those little artifacts. And by the way, these are artifacts that do show up in digital audio workstation mockup. You deal with that all the time in that kind of environment. So it wouldn't be a surprise that we deal with it here, even with very good samples. We're after the composite, and there's a lot that you can get away with in mocking up when it comes to artifacts from the samples and the play engines that you have to deal with in various platforms. Let's look at the tenor saxophone, and let's look at the saxophone complement here. We'll put the trombone in there too because it's in between. Look at this B section. In fact, we'll just do all the winds in this B section. You can really hear how they interplay together. So you see that bari sax with that little da-dum figure, and then also the bari sax attacks earlier than everybody else on this rhythm. It lands squarely on the downbeat, kind of sticking out there. Another thing here in terms of writing, when you write rhythmically for mock-up, you don't need to write it as it would be read. This might be a combination of triplet figures or something that would be a little bit more legible. What I'm going for is a performance, a nuanced interpretation of notation. So I'm actually writing in some pretty wacky rhythms that you wouldn't really write and put in front of somebody. You would allow them to interpret it, and this would be the performance interpretation of that writing. What would this be written? I don't care because I'm only doing a mock-up. What I have here, though, for this tenor saxophone, listen to this part. It's it's very loose. It's very loose rhythmically, and that's intentional. It's written in that way so that I can get a performance out of it rather than something that sounds like a computer playing back very rigid notation, as it would be for a human being. So those are the winds, and those are kind of the main elements of the wind section. You can see a lot of these articulations work. So the falls sound really good on the saxophone, alto saxophone, and the trumpet. The digs here work pretty good. A few things I had to write in, as I said, using glissandos and other articulations. A lot of mixing and matching here for articulation, staccato accents, and some spiccati sort of notation or articulation to get exactly the samples that I want when I want them. Let's look quickly at the rhythm section. Now, I did not write this with guitars in mind, or with piano in mind, or with organ, the keyboard instruments in mind, or even the bass in mind. I just generically put in some chords here without a care in the world. So this isn't really proper guitar voicing, as I would be concerned if I had an exposed guitar. I'm thinking more in terms of a recording artist kind of recording here, where you have the chance to go in and layer material on top of what you've already done. So if some things are playable, great. If they're not playable, I really don't care, particularly with the drum kit. But here I'll let you listen to this rhythm section real quick. A lot of copying and pasting in there for that that accompaniment. So very, very simple construction. Down here on the congas, what I did is I wrote a couple measures of a pattern, and then I offset it by one beat throughout the section, and then I went in and deleted or connected notes just to make it a little bit more random sounding. And if you listen to this by itself, it does sound quite random, but if you listen to it in the context of everything else, it sounds more improvisatory, which is what I was going for. There's no intelligible repetition. But if we listen to it in the context of the whole percussion complement, here's what we get. In fact, I'll put the bass in there too. If you're ever looking at percussion, always incorporate the bass, right? The bass is part of that rhythm section, that core of that group. So there you go. It's much more improvisatory in sound. It does sound logical when you put it in context with everything else. So these are that's how I approach this, and that's how I made it work. And then maybe there's a few details in there, a few pieces of advice that you might incorporate into your music. Best of luck with this. Happy composing and happy mixing.